Welcome to Undertalk with Toster and Jaye. We're going to talk about cool stuff from the late 80s and also from the 90s. My name is Jay Muller, and here is Olaf Toast.
Hello and welcome to the first English language podcast of Die Anderen. And this is a memorable weekend because it's the weekend of November 9th. And November 9th, 1989 was a very remarkable day in German history, and it also was a remarkable day in the history of our band. And we will tell you why.
And I also remember November 9th, 1989 very well. It's now 36 years ago. That's crazy.
Right. Unfortunately, we already split ways in November 1989. Jay was on his solo path, becoming a world-known rock star, and we were, struggling with a new lineup. And just by chance, we had concert in West Berlin on November 9th, being an East Berlin band. Why was that? It was because the manager and producer and partner of Jay Muller, Jack Riley from the United States, has somehow managed to convince the authorities in East Germany to give us, the musicians of Die Anderen and Feeling B and Tina Has Never Had a Teddy Bear, a visa for Western countries, which was a huge privilege back in those days. And so we had concerts actually from the mid of October through the mid of November. That was actually the duration of the visa. It wasn't endless. It was just valid for almost a month. But it was probably the most interesting episode in my life because history was made.
Don't forget, there was also the first West Berlin concert was in May 89. So 6 months before that, which was basically, I believe, my last concert. I wasn't even part of the band anymore, or maybe I was, but it was my last performance with Die Anderen. And that was in West Berlin, where we all had passports. That was also Feeling Bay, Tina Has Never Had a Teddy Bear, and Die Anderen. And after that is what you just said. I wasn't part of that anymore in October, November.
You are right. May 26th was kind of a pretext for the longer visa because we had only one day where we could go to the Ecstasy Club in West Berlin and give a concert for West Berliners. Well, basically our old friends who moved to West Berlin. It was kind of a campaign because we appeared in the city magazines, the newspapers and all that stuff. But we returned to East Berlin in an orderly fashion. So they thought they might give us a longer or an extended visa.
It was barely my last concert because I remember the month before I was still playing at Potsdam. I know that because the Lapu Lapu tapes are based on that concert. A lot of material came from that, of April 89. And then that was in May 89.
Yes, and I think you were already pretty busy. I think you were living in a very expensive hotel and already taking, trips to London or somewhere. So you were kind of a different planet already. We were still behind the wall, but we had that passport and that visa for just 1 month, and we kind of could wander between the two worlds, between East and West Berlin, which was really a big difference back in 1989. And I'm just very happy that I experienced that I've seen West Berlin before the war was opened.
Yeah, same for me. I love that I had the chance to experience both Germanys back then, how different they were. The feeling was different. And yet, and in Berlin, it was so crazy. And it's so hard to explain that to somebody now, because even though it was one city, West Berlin was so far away that it could have been around the world somewhere, or London or something. And at the same time, you could walk it within 5 minutes, basically. walk down Friedrichstraße or whatever, one of these crossing points, when you had a passport. I remember I was able to do that at Checkpoint Charlie before in that same year. And I remember also once, on the way going to West Berlin, I saw Alyosha coming back from the other side. We kind of met right in the middle in Checkpoint Charlie, which was a funny sort of occurrence. And I remember that very well. It's like, oh, hey, Checkpoint Charlie. And nobody else could go yet. That was like a weird privilege and very enjoyable when it was very special.
It was also a privilege in itself. Not only could you travel to West Berlin, you could also use the special border crossings because you probably had a working visa. And therefore, you were allowed to use what we called the diplomat's lane in Tränenpalast, Bahnhof Friedrichstraße. Plus, you could use Checkpoint Charlie, which was actually only for the Western allies and foreigners, actually. And Alyosha had a Swiss passport, but you might have had working visa and therefore were allowed to use Checkpoint Charlie.
Jack Riley and I walked several times along Friedrichstraße and just basically didn't stop. It kept going, from one to another. And there was a little short passport check, but we kept going. We take long walks from the east to the west. And that was like walking from one time zone to another time zone, or like such a different world. And I wish it could be possible to explain that. Only people who've done that, and you've done a similar thing, it can never be totally explained how weird that was.
Yeah, I mean, you also have to know, dear listener, that especially on Friedrichstraße, there under the pavement of Friedrichstraße, there was a subway that was going from West Berlin through East Berlin to West Berlin, and not accessible to East Berliners. All the stations, all the entrances, they were closed, they were locked, they were walled up. There was a layer of bricks, actually. All the emergency exits were sealed by plates of steel, actually. You could barely hear the subway when you knew that there was one, but it was kind of a secret back then. So Berlin, until the November 9th, was really a mysterious city, or rather a city of mysteries.
Yes, it was, especially if you really paid attention to all that kind of stuff, where the wall was going, what used to be there, where the subways go and all that. It was amazing.
Being allowed to travel between the two Berlins was really kind of an interplanetary journey to an Easterner. And it's really hard to explain to somebody 40 years later how it was like. And all of a sudden I understood that, all the mainstream musicians, the big ones, the rich ones, the big names in the GDR, they almost all had a passport and they could travel between the two worlds. I instantly understood what that privilege meant to them and that they want to keep it at all cost. And I was afraid that I could be, compromised in order to keep the privilege, and I would do things like for the government, for the state, that I wouldn't like to do just to keep the privilege.
Yeah, that's a tempting sort of thing. Luckily, I never had to do anything. People probably think I did have to do all sorts of things to get what I had, because I had a passport before, long before the wall came down. For some weird reason, I never had to do anything for like Stasi or secret police or inform or anything. The Stasi, by the way, asked me once, I don't know when that was, long before that, I think 1988 maybe or something. They did try to get me to inform on the scene, basically, the what's it called, the music scene, because I was drummer of the Anderen. And I remember saying to these two people, well, I really, honestly, I don't care about politics. I don't know anything. I have nothing to say. That's what I told them. And I think they believed me and gave up. That was it. There was no follow-up, nothing. And I did get my passport and I could travel, of course. And then in the end, that country was gone very quickly. But it was a very odd sort of year or year and a half for me and for you and for everybody who was part of this.
Yes. Talking about Friedrichstraße and the border crossings there were actually more than one. Um, it reminds me that we have a song, actually, it's one of our most famous songs, Freitagabend in Berlin, that kind of, has some hints in the lyrics about the special situation on Friedrichstraße. And I think it's a good idea to play it now, since Jay already remastered the song with his new Wonder tools, and here it is. Well, just talking about the pretext of the 1989 journey or kind of experience, the revolution, the opening of the Berlin Wall, was the concert in West Berlin and the Ecstasy in the borough of Schöneberg. It was very interesting in many regards, but one of the most interesting aspects was that I got to know the boss of the Ecstasy Club. His name was Bernd. He was a cool dude, actually, and he said, well, I was a sailor. I traveled the world, but I've never been to East Berlin as a West Berliner. He was around the world on his ships, but he never been to East Berlin. And he was, well, to change that, he got to know us, and then he came to East Berlin quite often, to the Club 29, Club 29 in Berlin Mitte, and kind of became a part of the gang, actually. He was that type of Westerner who was really open and supportive to East Berliners, and it's a shame that we lost contact, actually.
Well, maybe he will hear this, and who knows what he's doing now. That's very interesting. So I have a question. Since I wasn't part of this, how did the band, the anderen, end? How did you stop it, or how was it stopped?
Well, tell the story from the end, and then backwards. When the concert was done and we realized that it was true and not a hoax that the wall was open, we gathered in the backyard in Berlin-Kreuzberg, where the Pike Club was located. And I said to my friends, well, the whole society is about to change drastically. And our role in society is basically fulfilled. And it wouldn't be the same anymore in a Western capitalist society. Our music would be traded like a piece of soap or like a chocolate bar or whatever. And there's also a lot of opportunity opening up for each of us. I, for instance, want to travel. I want to travel, and I don't want to travel in a group. Actually, I want to go to America. I want to go to Asia. I don't, wherever. And we should split up, and everybody uses his chances. But let's vote, and then we voted, and we all voted for the dissolution, for the end of the band, actually. We said, okay, let's finish the concerts, let's fulfill the contracts, and then by the end of the year, 89, we're done, we're history.
Well, I think you had some amazing, clear foresight there. Now it's easy to see, of course, but then nobody really knew what was going to happen because it wasn't all decided yet. At least people didn't know. Maybe it was all decided, but not by the people. And the foresight that everything will change so drastically, you saw that clearly. I mean, I already was mentally and physically practically also gone. I left. I was briefly there still around that time, but I left in May 1990. So between wall opening and Vereinigung or Beitritt or whatever that was. And so I never really actually lived in unified Germany, which is another weird thing I sometimes have to remind myself.
Well, when was the time when you lived in Millerstraße?
Millerstraße, well, I left in May 1990. That was the final thing. That was up until then.
The period between the 18th of October, when Honecker was gone, till the currency union, I think it was 1st of July 1990, was possibly the freest, almost libertarian period of my whole life, because one system was done and the other system wasn't there. There was so much freedom and so much fun that will be a podcast of its own. That's one thing. The other thing is about my prediction about all will change drastically. Looking back at the 1990s, it is obvious that none of the former East German bands from the alternative music scene has ever made it to fame or riches. The only two East German bands with...
But haven't some of them have survived, right?
Yes, there were bands that were quite well known, like Zando, for instance. I think they existed until 1999 and then dissolved, but returned, I think, in 2005 or something. And there was also Die Art from Leipzig, who played all the time, but just stayed on that basically club level. But there were only two bands who really went big, and that's Rammstein and In Extremo. They were both founded in 1995. These are not the old East German bands. They were newly formed, and in the beginning it was disguised that they were from East Berlin, because this was such a bad mark. Being from the East was such a bad mark in the Western-dominated music industry.
I did not know that they're trying to keep that fact from the people. I remember in 95, 96, I was already living in New York, and I remember that I received a call from Paul Landers from Rammstein in New York saying that they're there or they're coming or something, and they're, just wanted to tell me because I'm living in New York. But I did not meet them, I know that, but I remember him calling.
I think it was the occasion that Rammstein played together with the Ramones. Well, mid-90s was the time when the record companies still had money. And Tim Renner of what is now Universal Music decided to put some money on the band. And they did.
And it worked.
Yes, it worked. But let's get back to the November 9th, and let me tell you what happened actually on the day.
Yes, please.
We were playing on November 9th. It was a very typical November day. I think it was cold and wet and dark. And the Pike Club wasn't big. It was like a 300 or 400 viewers capacity. And I think we listened to the radio before the concert. We were playing there with Feeling B, what was partly became Rammstein later. And on the radio, they said the Berlin Wall is open. We kind of thought, well, they're poking fun on us. But then the first folks from East Berlin came in. They had figured out that we would have a concert. They came into the Pike Club and they waved the blue GDR ID booklets and said, well, it's true, the wall is open. I thought, well, great. What should we do? And then we decided to, like Germans as we are, keeping contracts, behaving orderly, we decided to finish the concert. And after the concert, we went to a border crossing. I was on the Moritzplatz, Heinrich-Heine-Straße border crossing. That was a party I've never seen before. People were kind of screaming and yelling and, knocking on the roofs of the East German cars who came in, and we were drinking beer and hugging each other with people I've never seen before in my life. And I got so drunk that night. I barely remember that I woke up in an apartment owned by some punk in kind of an ocean of empty beer cans. And I was feeling so sick. I wish I was dead, actually. That was my November 10th.
Was that in East or West Berlin?
That was in West Berlin. I didn't make it back home that night. I was carrying my guitar and I slept at this punk's place in West Berlin. I don't know where. I remember I wanted to get back to East Berlin and it was virtually impossible because half of East Berlin was waiting on the other side, kind of, stomping and yelling, let us in. And I couldn't get out. The city was jammed, actually. I was sick. I felt so sick. I was hungover and I just wanted home in my bed. And then I wandered, I roamed around in search for a border crossing that was not so overcrowded. I finally got to Checkpoint Charlie. I thought, well, I had this privilege. Let's see if it still works. And of course it didn't. But I met a guy who was pretty advanced in the queue. And he kind of let me in and helped me. So it just took me like 10 minutes to get back to East Berlin on the other side. And it was already dark, November 10th. And then I was on the other side in East Berlin and said, kind of, oh, I made it. Finally, I made it. Just want to get home. And then out of the dark, a voice came like, hello, good evening. Do you speak English? I said, yes, a little bit. Oh, that's nice. Oh, the lights went on and then, hello, we are from the BBC News. Would you like to answer us a few questions? And I was looking like being in the water for like 3 weeks, dead. And I was kind of subconsciously answering questions like, would you like to go to West Berlin and work since the wall is open? Blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I don't know. I was just talking crap. But they were satisfied that they had their sound bites, And I think a few days later, I got a mail from Britain from PJ Harvey, actually. Holly, who used to be on tour with us in the summer of 1989 with the band Automatic Lamini. And we were kind of, we were writing letters and exchanging tapes. And she wrote she had seen me on British television in the news. And I said, I wish you rather not, but I couldn't undo it. So that was basically November 9th through November 10th. And then it took me a couple of days to go back to West Berlin because it was so overcrowded, West Berlin was flooded with East Berliners and East Germans. And actually, the West Berliners were so nice and so welcoming. I mean, even in the face of a gazillion of stupid staring Easterners with, oh, look at this, Beate, oh, the sex shop. And that was kind of annoying, and I was so embarrassed that I didn't want to be part of that crowd, so I stayed at home.
Yeah. Well, let me quickly tell you my November 9th wall opening story. I was actually in East Berlin because at the time I was part of this thing that Jack Riley and Steve Hedges and Tony Hollingsworth from England had organized this conference called Looking East. They had this idea, oh, now East and West is opening up and let's get all these musicians together, East and West. And there was this big sort of 3-day event in East Berlin. There were also various concerts and whatever. And so I was busy with that. But then there was this news thing, announcing the wall is open. And I remember first thing I did, I took a taxi or something to my mother. And it was already kind of later in the evening, I remember. And I think she was almost asleep. And I said, Mama, the wall is open. Let's go. We go. She didn't believe me. But then we went. I convinced her. We jumped in her car, which was, I remember, her Trabant. We drove to Bornholmer Straße. And there, I don't know if you know that, there's a movie about that now. Also with our friend Charlie Hübner. He's playing one of these, the main roles there. But I was in that actual scene in the Bornholmer Straße with my mother and Jack. We were walking from East Berlin towards West Berlin, where all the border crossing guards had no idea what they were doing. They just kind of, okay, whatever, it's open now. We don't know what's going on, but go. So almost everybody there walked basically like about 150 meters across the border until they were sure, yes, we're really in West Berlin, wow. And then I'd say more than half just turned around and went back to East Berlin, including us. Some, of course, went further and wanted to see the rest of the city. But we just walked back, jumped back in the Trabant, and my mother went home, and we went back to the hotel to our events and all that stuff. That's how I experienced that evening.
Right. I think if we want to play another song that kind of celebrates a new era, we should play Paul's Hochzeit. Because the chorus is like, let's go, get out of here, looking for a new affair. And that was really what we did after November 9th.
Cool. Awesome. I love that song. It was always amazing to play live. So let's end the show with this one, with Paul's Hochzeit, okay? And then we're going to have another episode next week again, every Sunday so far. Let's see if we stick to that. You okay with that?
Yes, I'm okay with that. We try to keep up the routine. And I'm sure we have a lot of stuff to tell for many more episodes to come. And until then, everybody have a nice week, please. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Paul's Hochzeit.